Putin considers the war against Ukraine his historical mission and sees himself as a new gatherer of lands, writes the Financial Times. And in order to obtain territories that the Russian army has been unable to conquer for more than 10 years, he is proposing a deal. My colleague Nikita Skoblikov will continue on this topic.
In a conversation with Donald Trump, Putin, as a condition for ending the war against Ukraine, demanded that the entire Donetsk region be handed over to Russian control. High-ranking officials reported this to the Washington Post on condition of anonymity. The Russian dictator stated that in return he is ready to give up the territories of Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions temporarily occupied by the Russian army.
Putin has unsuccessfully tried to conquer this territory for 11 years, facing resistance from Ukrainian forces, who have deeply entrenched themselves in the area. They consider the region an important stronghold against Russia's rapid advance westward toward their capital. Putin's focus on Donetsk indicates that he is not backing down from his previous demands, which have led the conflict to a deadlock, despite Trump's optimism about reaching an agreement, as reported by the Washington Post.
The head of the Kremlin keeps repeating. The Russian army is allegedly advancing along the entire front line. He tried to convince the US president of this as well during a phone conversation on October 16th. But in Washington, they do not believe such statements. They know perfectly well that the real situation at the front is completely different.
I think there is a fundamental mismatch of expectations. I would say that this applies to Russia's war against Ukraine, where the Russians tend to believe that their actions on the battlefield are more successful than they actually are. And I think that because of this, it has become more difficult to reach an agreement under these circumstances.
Financial Times analysts are convinced that Putin does not intend to stop his aggression against Ukraine. In their opinion, the Russian dictator sincerely believes that he can win. Moreover, he is even willing to turn a blind eye to the collapse of Russia's economy. For Putin, the war against Ukraine has an ideological meaning, experts summarize.
For Putin, it's not a matter of money, it's his legacy. He wants to go down in history as the greatest Russian ruler since Peter the Great. He believed he could give Trump a victory but decided not to do so. From a Financial Times publication.
Proof that Putin is not seeking peace is his new order, which paves the way for the large-scale resettlement of Russians to territories of Ukraine temporarily occupied by the Russian army. As noted by the Center for National Resistance, this is essentially a program to replace the local population and accelerate Russification. The resettlers are being offered benefits, simplified bureaucratic procedures, and promises of assistance with housing and employment. Moscow plans to populate the Ukrainian lands occupied by Russia, with residents from impoverished Russian regions.
The Kremlin is launching a program to colonize the temporarily occupied territories. According to the new migration concept, conditions are to be created for the return of residents of Donbas, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions. But the plan is not to bring back Ukrainians but loyal subjects from the depths of Russia, from Yakutia to Buryatia. In fact, this is the legalization of population replacement, the displacement of locals, and the settlement of new Russians, Russification, demographic engineering, and old colonial methods in a new guise. From a publication by the Center for National Resistance on Telegram.
If we look at the statistics, there aren't even people now in the temporarily occupied territories who would go to work in the housing and utilities sector or even do basic jobs as drivers of route buses and trolley buses. In other words, there is a colossal shortage of personnel.
The Center for National Resistance notes, the Kremlin's new strategy in the temporarily occupied territories is an attempt to revive the old imperial model of settling Siberia, when settlers were used to consolidate the central government's power over captured lands. Now the occupiers are trying to play out the same scenario in Ukraine.
Russia is recruiting so-called disposable spies in Europe. This was reported by the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine. Since 2022, European countries have expelled several hundred Russian intelligence officers. That is why recruiters from Russia are now offering ordinary citizens one-time assignments for a reward. My colleague Victoria Chistyukina will tell you more about this.
Russian intelligence agencies have stepped up recruitment of residents of European countries. Most of these cases have been recorded in Poland and the Baltic states. 130 people in 12 European countries are suspected of working for Russia. Realizing the inevitability of their agents' failure, Moscow prefers to use so-called one-time spies. Their goal is to gather information and undermine European stability.
Russian recruiters actively use the internet, social networks, church communities, sports clubs, and mass events to find potential operatives. Such people are usually recruited only once to obtain information or carry out specific tasks in the interests of the aggressor. This is part of the Kremlin's hybrid strategy aimed at undermining the security of European countries. From a statement on the website of Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service,
Moscow had to resort to such risky and unreliable methods after Russia's spy network was thoroughly dismantled in Europe. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, European intelligence services have expelled about 700 agents who were operating under the cover of Russian diplomatic missions.
the largest purges took place in Bulgaria, where 82 representatives of Russian diplomatic institutions were declared persona non grata. In Germany, 65 people were expelled, in Poland 58, in Romania 52, and in Slovakia 39. In the Netherlands and Slovenia 34 each, according to a statement on the website of Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service.
Russia is ramping up its hybrid activities in Europe, and Moscow could launch a military conflict against NATO and the European Union in the coming years, according to the head of Germany's Federal Intelligence Service, Martin Jaeger.
The hybrid methods that Russia uses to achieve this goal have become a widespread phenomenon. The frequency of such incidents represents a new level of confrontation, a standoff in which Russia views us as an adversary and, in fact, as a warring party. Despite attempts to conceal its true intentions, Moscow is in reality seeking to test the strength of our borders. At best, Europe will maintain a cold peace, which at any moment could escalate into open confrontation. We must be prepared for a further escalation of the situation. Martin Jaeger, head of Germany's Federal Intelligence Service, in a comment to Bloomberg.
Hidden and direct attacks by Russian special services are being recorded in Europe with increasing frequency. Analysts are convinced that Russia is already preparing for a possible war with NATO.
Ongoing acts of sabotage by Russia and reconnaissance activities by Russian drones targeting military bases and critical infrastructure in Europe indicate that Russia has already entered phase 0 of its campaign to prepare for a possible war with NATO, according to a report by the Institute for the Study of War.
To prevent further escalation, the alliance must limit Russia's ability to threaten Europe. The head of Germany's Ministry of Foreign Affairs is convinced.
We must always remember that Russia is interested not only in Ukraine. Russian aggression is directed against all of Europe and NATO. We hear this from Moscow quite often, and we are increasingly seeing how Russia is testing NATO's resolve. To prevent further escalation of Putin's extremely dangerous game, we must continue to limit his ability to threaten us. This includes depleting Russia's military budget.
Russia uses any means to destabilize Europe. Recently, Polish border guards discovered an underground passage beneath the Polish-Belarusian border. The tunnel started in Belarus and ended on the Polish side, about 20 meters from the border line. According to Euronews, this is the second tunnel discovered this year along the border section between the two countries. The first one was found near the border post in Narevka. It is likely that these structures are intended to help saboteurs and migrants get from Belarus into Poland. Since January 2025, Polish border service employees have documented more than 26,000 attempts at illegal border crossings.
Russia has begun implementing a new migration policy aimed at artificially changing the demographics of the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. This was reported by the Center for National Resistance. The Kremlin allegedly intends to create conditions for the return of residents of Donbas, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions as well. However, instead of returning Ukrainians, what is actually happening is the resettlement of citizens from Russia's interior regions.
The Kremlin is launching a program to colonize the temporarily occupied territories. According to the new migration concept, it is mandated to create conditions for the return of residents of Donbas, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions. But the plan is not to bring back Ukrainians, but rather loyal subjects from the depths of Russia, from Yakutia to Buryatia. In fact, this is the legalization of population replacement, the displacement of locals, and the settlement of new Russians, Russification, and demographic engineering. And old colonial methods in a new wrapper.
Dictator Putin, in a phone conversation with the US president, demanded that Ukraine give up the Donetsk region as a condition for ending the war. This was reported by the Washington Post. In exchange, Putin is allegedly ready to give up the parts of Zaporizhia and Kherson regions occupied by Russia. These territorial claims are somewhat less than those he put forward in August at the summit in Anchorage. Some White House staff even saw such a statement from the dictator as progress. Trump himself has not yet publicly commented on this demand. President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Ukraine does not agree to give up either Donetsk or any other territories to the aggressor. He said this in a video address. Let's listen.
We will give nothing.
We will not give the aggressor anything, and we will not forgive them anything. We clearly see that Russia is a long-term threat, so here in Europe we need years of cooperation and real results both in the short term and in the longer term so that people can live. And one more thing. I have instructed our diplomats and have already discussed this with many leaders to prepare a meeting of the coalition of the willing in the near future. Here in Europe we need common strong positions, and this will happen.
Putin will not end the war until he gets some part of Ukraine. This was stated by Donald Trump. The US president expressed this opinion in an interview with Fox News. Trump expressed confidence that the Russian dictator will not make territorial concessions because, as the American leader put it, Putin's goal was to take something. His army has seized certain territories. At the same time, Trump also emphasized that he cannot give all his weapons to Ukraine since he believes that this would put the United States of America in danger.